Boa tarde a todos, muito obrigada pela presença, é uma honra tê-los aqui hoje. Meu nome é Fernanda Fará e hoje comentaremos sobre Sustainable Bonds, ou título de dívidas sustentáveis, assunto que tem sido o volume das emissões ESG de crédito brasileiro em janeiro de 2021 apresentou um aumento de 49% em relação às emissões de todo o ano de 2020. Em 2021, estima-se que governos e empresas irão emitir algo em torno de 500 bilhões em green bonds. Nesta live, iremos aprofundar o tema com a Schroders Asset Management Global, com mais de 693 bilhões de dólares sobre gestão, que irá trazer luz às diferentes categorias e requisitos para um título ser considerável ou sustentável. Além de comentarmos sobre as vantagens desses títulos, tanto da perspectiva do emissor quanto do investidor. Eu gostaria de agradecer a presença da Saida Egerstedt, representante da Schroders desde 2019. A Saida é Head of Sustainable Credit e trabalha com investimento em renda fixa ESG desde 2008. Saida é formada em finanças pela Drexel University e iniciou sua carreira como Financial Analyst no The World Bank, passando por outras instituições como Deutsche Investment Trust, DEC Investment, Union Investment e Standard Life Investment. CFA Chairholder desde 2000. Hello, Saida. It's a pleasure to have you here with us. Do you hear me?
Yes, I do.
Yes.
Hello. Good afternoon.
So, without have you started the ESG investment front? And also, as the head of the sustainable credit, what is your role within the institution?
Sure. Thank you for your question. I think the first time I really did ESG without realizing it was at the World Bank, that they were trying to give financial loans to people in poorer countries where banks were not taking risks. So, smaller enterprises, smaller entrepreneurs, really helping intermediation there with NGOs. Later on, I had the opportunity to manage, and from the very beginning, one of the first sustainability bond funds in Germany. And that was just over 10 years ago. Interestingly enough, most fund managers didn't want to manage sustainable funds then. They thought it's too much work, it was boring. But I really enjoyed it every day as I learned so much from just the time when the green bond market also started kicking off in the corporate bond world. At Schroders, which is an international asset manager with more than 100 years of history and more than employing 5,000 people all around the world, it is also for us very important to have a sustainable investment process. Having said that, it was dominated or was a dominating theme more in the equity investor world, where there is also voting power. And the fixed income side has been growing. So it is my honor to help my tools and investment process, and also invest in sustainable bonds and increase the profile of sustainable fixed income as an asset class.
Good, really impressive. You have been working with that since the beginning, right? So,
as you point out, it was the World Bank and other sub-sovereign issuers like development banks, which were in the beginning issuing these bonds. But then we also had some banks who wanted to, on one hand, improve their profile with investors after the financial crisis, coming out of it. and also saw the opportunity to invest in green energy, for example, and to finance that, or green mortgage and finance that in the ESG bond market. What we saw, though, over the last few years, the sectors have really grown from where an ESG issuer can come, and green bond is the core part of it. The proceeds of the green bonds are normally invested in environmental or climate-related goals, which is then backed up by the entire balance sheet of the company, in the case of corporate issuers. And it could be used for capital expenditure, ideally for capital expenditure. It can be for financing or refinancing, let's say, more environmental friendly transportation, or buildings, or more energy efficiency. It's also increasingly common, not just new buildings, but it could be also protecting the environment by recycling more waste or making energy from waste and so on. On the social side, it's a newer theme, which really grew on the back of COVID as well. And the objectives, again, are clearly social benefits. For example, creating more employment or helping out less advantaged part of a country. Maybe it can also come from a well-to-do countries, basically creating more equality or reducing inequality. But it also could be for purpose which normally sovereigns finance, like social housing, education, and importantly, healthcare and well-being as well. We saw that as well. The third kind is sustainability bonds, which is a combination of green and social objectives. It could be that an issuer does not have enough use of the money for green projects or social projects, but on the other hand, they want to give investors a message about their sustainability objectives, sometimes also with milestones, like if they do not achieve certain sustainability goal by a certain time, they might have to pay a higher coupon after that time. All these issuers, whether it's a sustainability, social, or green bond issuer, it's very important for them to communicate very clearly what are the funds actually, what's the objective of issuing that bond, what could be the different use of proceeds, sometimes linking them to social development goals of the UN, and certainly having very good governance so that the fear of greenwashing is not there. And sometimes we ask issuers to link the green bond or social bond language to the incentives of the treasurer or the top management. So we know that, the bond proceeds will be used in a prudent and transparent manner. And at the end of the day, all of these issuers need to also do impact reporting.
Sorry, I was at mute here. And how has been the development of this market, considering the issue of each type of bond?
Well, last year we really saw a boom in social bonds, but also must be saying encouraged by semi-government issues. So like the European Union, they issued quite a few tranches of social bonds. And then some banks, French banks, they also issued. From the emerging market issuers, we saw also more green bonds from the Chinese property sector, for example, or renewable energy companies. From Brazil or Latin America, we also saw some sustainability bond, very innovative and very holistic in their sustainability approach. So the market really became higher than $1 trillion of volume. And it's a meaningful part of the ESG mandate in the fixed income world.
So it's also good to know that different types of bonds is an opportunity for companies to issue sustainable. And so at Schroders, do you have a specific green portfolio separating sustainable assets from non-green ones? And how is your investment policy?
I think We have sustainable bond funds, focusing on different parts of the fixed income world, pure credit to multi-credit and multi-asset. And we, of course, also have themed funds like carbon neutrality, social funds, so on. What is important for the sustainable investor is also to have exclusion. So like energy that's based on fossil fuels, that cannot be bought in those funds. And also big violation of human rights, environmental objectives. The so-called UNGC, UN Global Compact violators cannot be bought. And then we might also exclude weapons. We certainly do exclude weapons, and so tobacco. So everything that's long-term, not sustainable. We also look at the carbon intensity of the portfolio versus the universe. That is kind of a proxy to show if the world is going to limit global warming. And we take a combination of less intense companies, but also companies which are improving. So for green investors, sustainable investors, it's important not just to invest in good quality ESG bonds, but also the companies which are improving from a low base, maybe, and to help them, accompany them. We also make strategic allocations to green bonds. Social bonds are not really a big part, but increasingly interesting, and also sustainability bonds, and when possible, in different currencies and in different countries.
Okay, it's good to know about the procedures you apply within this market. And thinking about investor perspective from a risk and reward, what type of investor, if not all, could benefit from allocated in green bonds? Do they offer attractive yields related to other fixed income securities, or non-ESG focused investors are not likely to consider them in their portfolios?
I think investing in green bonds has many benefits. You get to know the issuer much better because you're just not looking at their financial metrics as of now, but you're really trying to learn how the bond issuer is actually looking at climate-related risks, physical risk. What are they doing to make sure that their business is future-proof from various environmental risks? And it can be also, you learn about innovation. Is it LED lighting? Is it more energy efficient heating? What exactly is, making them more environmental friendly? Or when it's a sovereign or sub-sovereign, how can they help with green infrastructure? And we see that new governments, for example, in the US and even China, kind of committing to carbon neutrality 2060, which is very far away. You cannot maybe always imagine that, but by understanding and investing in green bonds today, we can have milestones for next 3 years, 5 years, and really go greener. It also makes one curious, right? Like an energy company or a technology company, for example, that they emit also a lot of carbon. And if they issue green bonds, do they actually really reduce the total carbon emission, given that technology is being used increasingly? So what could be there? Could they have solar panels and so on? When we also invest in some European companies like EDP, which has big business in Brazil and the US. So when we have dialogues with such companies, we understand how actually the energy sector might work in Brazil, which we might not understand from Europe if we had not talked to these multinational companies who are frequent issuers of green bonds. When it comes to valuation, there is certainly more demand than supply. So I guess issuers are sometimes opportunistic. So we try to be selective and gain also some diversification, as I said before, in sector. Sometimes we also buy names from cyclical sectors, which are maybe not in favor because the world is in COVID, everybody's staying at home. But if it's an issuer with good ESG potential, then we, and the valuation is attractive, we could do that. at the end of the day, it's also important to use market weaknesses to buy some. And, we try to do that. So because we are long-term investors. Now, to answer your other question, I think non-ESG investors, they certainly have more choices because they might not have exclusion. And on the other hand, they might think that, they don't want to pay up, or on the other hand, if that investor really want to create an impact, and like our company has the motto of profit with purpose increasingly, and we also look, we are ourselves have committed to carbon neutrality. We encourage inclusion, social inclusion, taking care of mental health. And if that becomes a culture of the investment company, then I guess they will buy green or social bond, or certainly companies with better green or social credentials.
So bringing the discussion to the context of Brazil. Brazil is one of the main global players when we think about natural resources, biodiversity, and aside from sustainability efforts. So what are the key opportunities and challenge for such a country from the sustainable financing standpoint?
Brazil is indeed a very rich country, both domestically and international. So we have seen for many years that some of the leaders from Brazil, especially the paper sector, which exports quite a bit, employs a lot of people, use forests, but also take care of reforestation. And they have issued, green bonds and sustainability-linked bonds, sometimes even innovative ones, like I think the last one from Klabin had a step up in coupon, which was related to water consumption intensity, water reuse, biodiversity preservation. So it really shows how many ways you can actually take care of the nature in a natural resource-rich country like Brazil. But Brazilian companies can also kind of highlight their objectives, their social objectives, even the ones that has to do with more equality, safer working environment, which can be a problem in the mining industry. It can have controversies. To really be bold about using controversies, about their policies against controversies, and how to really take care of the people who are working there, which might also bring in new customers who are also concerned about ESG. On the other hand, companies like Natura, which has organic cosmetic, and the way I understand, there is increasing focus on organic cotton and everything natural in Brazil as well. Domestic market is big. So I think issuers in the domestic and foreign markets can bring in different kinds of green and social bonds, that's for sure, which might also really make investors appreciate that the private sector in cooperation, certain industries which also have sustainability focused cooperation, can function kind of independent of the political volatility or the slower economy that might come from a COVID that lasts longer than feared.
Clearly, we still have in your opinion, how can the government be more active in this market or act to benefit? What is their role to help increase this market?
I think governments everywhere have a very big role. First of all, if governments have policies which prioritize a green and social economic development, and that is also helped by the governments themselves issuing green or socially sustainable bonds, which publicly show the commitment with clarity what the social or green agenda is, that certainly helps. Now, of course, it's a lot of work because in ESG, green or social bonds, we need a lot of data. We really like to see numbers. We need to see the numbers over years, and we want to see which way it's going. And governments actually have these numbers anyway. The ministries have them. So all they have to do is work in cooperation. And we saw that when the Italian government was issuing a green BTP a few weeks ago, how the treasurer was working with the Ministry of Environment, with the Ministry of Smart Mobility, and so on. So I guess if different ministries work together, and what happens is if there are liquid government bond cards, then many companies are also, they have to also issue green or social bonds, and certainly have to come up with a framework that emphasizes the ESG profile. So it kind of has a really domino effect. Sometimes the governments, what we have also heard in certain emerging markets, actually give a subsidy on interest if the companies are raising external market green bond financing. Of course, that's a fine balancing act. Probably it's better to give some subsidies into renewable energy, in public transportation, in affordable transportation as well, green, having roads, helping communities, and really at the very bottom level, involving the municipalities, the local governments, who might have also their ideas of how one can make small differences, and certainly phase
Sarah,
out fossil fuel.
I didn't hear you the last 30 seconds, sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So I guess the last thing I was saying is governments also need to actually phase out the subsidies that goes into fossil fuel, and which might be unpopular in the short term. But if the governments, invest in renewable energy, at one point the cost will come down and be competitive also for consumers. So, so in the long term, governments have a very big role to play.
Good, thank you. And also we are living at difficult times with COVID-19 pandemic. And how has it affected your asset allocation decisions? And also how sustainable bonds can be part of the solution for the COVID-19?
I think what COVID-19 has done is that, we all have understood that certain things we can't control in life, but also, like basic access to good healthcare, to good air, less pollution, access to digital education, availability of internet. All these are very important, not only for the well-to-do, but also for the mass and especially the lower income population, because otherwise it creates lots of inequality, unhappiness, which then has a repercussion for generations to come. And on the other hand, if one invests in a good infrastructure that will stay for a long time, and if it's green. So what we saw is that policymakers took up many of the social and green bond agenda. Actually, they made new policies, and companies showed a lot more sympathy with the stakeholders by financing suppliers, by really giving the frontline workers a better, safer working environment. And also issues like gender equality, which should be actually automatic, but is not in this world. And those inequality are also coming in front because people know otherwise you cannot have a productive working place, robust decisions. So COVID has certainly bring the social agenda in front. And at the same time, we know that when the economic growth comes back again, then carbon emission might also come back. So that's why it's important to use the lessons from last year in building back more green. In asset allocation, of course, we profited quite a bit last year from the central bank incentive, from very attractive valuation after the initial sell-off, and also many quality issuers came at a good price, which was attractive, which helped our performance. This year, the market is, of course, pricing in higher growth, at least because, and some inflation as well, also because commodity prices have gone up. By the way, also in the back of demand for electric vehicles or solar panels, which use quite a bit of metal. So we're, as fixed income investors, are a bit more conservative this year. We want the rates to go up once we know that the rates have maybe priced in some. That's where we like to buy newer bonds again. And at the same time, it's important to continue our analysis, continue the dialogues with the issuers, and build a long-term investment theme for sustainability funds.
And as an investor, what homework you need to watch for? What's an important thing when you're analyzing a sustainable bond?
When we analyze it, we try to have kind of a sector relative performance analysis in terms of ESG commitment, in terms of ESG track record. And even if they were maybe not good, but they have clear commitments and measurable targets going forward. And that what they're allocating to also makes actually economic sense, right? Because we're still investors who still have to give we have to get the money back at the end of the maturity. So, but what we also see, many companies, especially the ones who are also, for example, committing to science-based target of carbon reduction, they actually say that becoming more ESG oriented might increase their innovation, might attract new customers, right? Have more pricing power, but also more importantly, improve their reputation as bond issuers. So we take all these ESG consideration while trying to also buy a green bond. It's important for us that the green bond or social bond does not have too long, does not finance too old projects. Under the green bond principles, you can have up to 3 years, but it's also nice to have future projects, but also not too far in the future, but some of the projects are like that. So then we need yearly report and continuous interaction with the companies. It's also nice if a green bond issuer as a whole goes greener. So if they have some objective like using less water, less natural resources, that it becomes sustainable and it keeps on happening and was not just one time.
Okay. And like what is your recommendation, like as an investor?
I couldn't hear the first part of your question, sorry.
How would you do to issue a sustainable bond from a controversial sector?
I think the controversial sector, they also need to become more sustainable, but it's important to talk about the challenges the issuer has had or the sector has had, and really show that what is the current management doing to address those controversies, how they're also taking regular feedback from the stakeholders, which if the controversy has to do with the employees, then that they're having proper employee policies. If it's about the regulators, that the regulators know how the company is changing. And of course, if it's also the customers, that's the worst kind. You really have to then also that they have a new investment process. If it's a brown sector trying to issue green bonds or go greener, then it's important also to have a very clear multi-year plan and see consistent improvement. And if the improvement doesn't come, why not? And what's the plan B? It is dangerous to overpromise actually in a green bond or social bond market and not disclose all the risks and the controversies that could have been. That's equally important to get the credibility. One of the names that was very controversial was Volkswagen. You know what happened with their diesel scandal, and it happened all over the world. And so they really broke investors' trust. And at the same time, interestingly, they're a very big bond issuer. So, and I couldn't buy Volkswagen in my fund because, you know, they had such high environmental controversy. But at the same time, we kept as Schroders engaging with the company. And we even focused on things like if they're training the young apprentices on environmental regulation and the motivation there. So there's a big human capital part as well when it comes to controversies. And we keep on working with them, and this engagement and maybe incremental investment in the controversial names, that gives us some opportunities because it could be that the prices are very wide. And on the other hand, the issuer also appreciates the feedback there, and so they can improve.
Good. And so finally, what, in your opinion, what does the future holds for the sustainable bonds?
I think the sustainable bond market will keep on growing. It will sometimes have hiccups, right? But I can certainly see that issuers will make the extra step, on one hand, to commit to sustainability, to publish sustainability reports where they also talk about the activities, but also see if they can actually have more less volatile cash flow by becoming more sustainable and giving the whole message through the issuance of green, social, or sustainability bonds. There is certainly a big demand from impact investors to buy green, social, or sustainability bonds, as these bonds have clear purpose and reporting in most of the cases. And valuation, of course, can become unattractive sometimes, and one has to be selective. But in the long term, I think the investor base will certainly grow. But we certainly need more issuance from countries like Brazil, countries in Asia, who are also having the investors and consumers of the future. So, you know, problems like climate change is a global problem, and all the countries and all the companies have worked towards it. So a lot more diversification is most welcome.
Good. And all the questions, you said a lot about the reports and the importance of it. What is a mandatory thing for you to have in a report and to the maturity of the bond?
I think it's important that there is no double counting, right? It's also important to show that the various breakdown, if there are 4 or 5, then really clear allocation over the projects. It's also important to show not only new, let's say, more efficiency rich, but also carbon avoided. In terms of social bonds, it's important to also kind of show how many people have been impacted, how many maybe hospital beds, or how many schools or students have been helped. So really trying to put some numbers, being conservative, but being detailed, and doing it on an annual basis. And if possible, when we talk to the companies, or they also mention in their report, how these bonds are actually helping them to in their greater green or social objectives. So that relation is also important. As you might know, that there are some EU green bond standards coming up, social bond standards coming up in the sense of reporting, not just the objectives, but what they have to report. It's important to have a second party opinion, but it's also important that the reports are certified by an external party, so that, it's not just the company saying that we have done this and that, but it is an auditor who's also looking that it has been done diligently.
I didn't ask you, and you like to add about the sustainable bonds?
I think it's good to be strict and expect a lot, but it's also important to be enthusiastic about the sustainable bond market and really help issuers to think in a sustainable way and commit more, maybe in small steps, but measurable steps, and really think that the financial future of the issuers in the long term are also very much related with their sustainability profile, and take the time. The more investors demand that, we're going to have sustainable growth in this world, which might not be so high, but certainly more fair and greener.
Okay, good. So we are coming to the end of our live here. Thank you so much, Saira, for sharing your views, the importance of the sustainable bonds, and also how it can help the world to be a better place. And thank you everyone for watching us. Good night.
Thank you.